Hi, I'm Lydia O'Neill. I'm an EU correspondent at the Capital Forum, and you're watching the Capital Forum's ABA Spring Meeting interview series. We have Damien Geradin, founder of Geradin Partners, which is well known for representing a lot of small tech companies and enemies of big tech in antitrust and DMA cases, Digital Markets Act cases. And so we wanted to talk about a few Apple cases that are still pending. There's the Digital Markets Act case against Apple for violating the ban on restricting developers from steering users to cheaper options outside of the App Store. There was a final decision and €500 million fine in that case, 60 days for Apple to propose remedies. They proposed something, but I believe you have said it's very little change for your clients.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. First of all, I should say that I'm representing indeed sometimes small companies, but also a lot of big companies, including American companies, that have issues with Apple's App Store practices. In terms of this investigation, so there was a decision last year, and the decision was quite severe. I mean, if you read the decision, you see that the Commission has spared no punches. Then, of course, as a result of the decision, Apple needed to be compliant with the decision, but more generally with the DMA. And that is something that happened, maybe 10 months ago. Since then, we're waiting for Apple to comply. And we haven't seen anything yet. They came out last year with terms in June, and these terms were very problematic. They didn't move the needle, so app developers complained. And since then, we understand that they're having discussions with the Commission, and in their latest compliance report, which came out about a month ago, or a little bit less than that, maybe 3 weeks ago, they are basically sticking to their June term, saying, well, we're still in discussion with the European Commission. And that is a problem because one of the advantages of the DMA, as it was presented, was quick resolution. The DMA was partly adopted because competition law took forever. And there, it was basically said that you have 1 year to complete the investigation. And then since the obligations are quite clear, that will force companies to be compliant fairly quickly. And we're not seeing that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no need to define markets or establish dominance.
Exactly.
Just clear-cut rules. Don't do this, do this. But what do you think is behind the delay, and how is it affecting your clients?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to know what's behind the delays because the Commission is always reluctant to explain what's happening. So I think there are different explanations, and there's probably a bit of truth in each of them. So one explanation is the current political situation with the Trump administration being vocal and potentially the Commission being afraid of imposing, terms and conditions on Apple that are very challenging for the company. So that's one explanation. It's not the full explanation in my view, because in the meantime, the Commission has adopted some very strict enforcement decision, like the Google AdTech decision last year with a fine of 2.95 billion euros. It has opened investigation. It has imposed interim measures on Meta and so on. So I think that there's a bit of that, but I'm not sure. I think a second explanation is that Apple is a company with lots of resources, and they're probably throwing spanners in the Commission wheels, and that's making things difficult for the Commission. And it's true that there is an asymmetry of information and there's an asymmetry of resources. For one Commission official, you probably have 10 lawyers on the other side, and that is really challenging. And then thirdly, it was perhaps a bit naive to think that the DMA would be that simple, because some of the provisions are ambiguous, and the Commission has to always pursue a route that is sustainable if the matter goes on appeal. And I think they're quite cautious. So I think probably we're in this situation because of these three reasons. As to which one is prevailing, to be honest, I don't know.
It seems strange that, the Commission maintains, they don't want to do fines. They want to strike deals with these
Yes.
companies. But at the same time, Apple has been notoriously the most hard-headed and obstinate, has called for the DMA to be repealed. And so do you have faith in the Commission's ability to reach a deal with this company that would actually be in full faith compliance with the DMA?
I think that the only way out is for the Commission at some point to say, okay, you're not in compliance. Now I'm going to impose periodic penalty payments, such as 10 million a day or 50 million a week. And that is something they've done in the past. Microsoft had been in that position. And then when you have these periodic penalty payments, I think companies need to do something because it's totally open-ended, right? Every day it's another 10 million, another 5 million. And so I think the Commission, as a last resort, should go in that direction because otherwise we'll be in the same position in a year's time. And I must say that it calls into question the credibility of the DMA, and we see a lot of our clients getting a little discouraged, saying, oh, you said the DMA would be helping. Yes, it is helping, but it's not helping in the way we expected.
So we should say you represent the Coalition for App Fairness, which includes Spotify, Match Group, Epic Games. And so just to break down what Apple has actually proposed, I think the way you've spelled it out is that it adds up to essentially the same fees for link outs. They're just broken down into different amounts. Could you explain?
Yes. So basically, historically, we moved from, the situation was that you had to pay 30% or 15% to Apple, and you needed to use IAP, which is their own in-app payment solution. Now with the DMA, it's no longer possible for Apple to maintain that position. So what they've done is that they have somehow opened the system whereby you can, for example, use alternative payment solutions, or you can use link outs, steering the user to a different place where they can acquire content. But what Apple has done is a combination of friction and fees. And so, app developers are not really comfortable taking advantage of these new solutions, either because the friction will mean conversion losses. If the system doesn't work flawlessly, people will just drop out. And also, the accumulation of fees means that the delta between what they could gain using their own system and IAP is very small. So that means that through this combination of measures, Apple has been able to maintain the status quo, which is extremely frustrating.
Malicious compliance, some people would call it. But there's also another investigation into Apple under the DMA. Began, I believe, in summer of 2024.
Yeah.
We've already had preliminary charges last year, but it's still, it's behind this 1 year best endeavor deadline for non-compliance investigations. But it's also potentially affected by this other case involving steering, because Apple, as part of their remedies, has proposed phasing out this core technology fee, that 50 cents per installation per year, I believe.
Yep.
And how does that remedy in the steering case potentially affect this other case that for which we're waiting for a final decision?
No, that's correct. So I think that the Commission will want, of course, these two decisions to work together, right? So it's not as if they could run these cases separately and thinking, okay, I'm doing this one on 6.4 and that other one on 5.4. The scope of the 6.4 investigation has always been a bit less clear. I understand it's focusing more on issues of friction rather than fees. And the goal is to make sure that Apple will facilitate the ability, for example, of alternative app stores to compete on iOS devices and so on. But indeed, I think the second investigation is a little bit hostage to the first, because they will want something that will, probably work on both sides. And at the end of the day, I think it will be for the Commission and Apple to agree on some sort of package that is compliant with these provisions and the DMA as a whole. What is unfortunate, of course, but that was to be expected, is that this claim that the investigations would be wrapped up in 12 months is no longer true, right? And it's the case also for the Article 6.5 investigation.
Google,
when it comes to Google, we're way beyond the year.
2 years today.
Yes, exactly. So we're way beyond the deadline. And it's a bit unfortunate because the DMA was sold as a faster, more effective process. But I always said to my clients, look, the adoption of a DMA was a success because it's a good piece of regulation, but implementation will be the acid test of the success of the DMA. And at the moment, it's not a non-mitigated success, I must say.
Well, we do have, besides non-compliance investigations, there's the specification proceeding, which is the proceeding that actually has concrete deadlines that the Commission must hit. It's sort of seen as a softer approach to enforcement, but at the same time, with the Apple specification proceeding forcing interoperability measures, we actually have seen results because Apple has been forced to do this. That their effort to have the requirements waived was denied. Do you think that's a better way forward?
I think one does not exclude the other. It's probably a more pragmatic way of operating. It's less contentious. But at the end of the day, I think it's still important to open proceedings when there is an unwillingness of these companies to comply. So at the end of the day, the Commission cannot, it has to do something at some point. And I think they'll probably do the right thing, but in this current context, it's not obvious. Although I don't know what's the position of the commissioners. I'm only talking to the case team. I'm not talking to the top leadership on these issues.
Well, we'll see what they decide to do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.